Hey, welcome to this week's episode of the People's Report, News for the Left, brought to you by Solidarity TV. Today is February 11th, 2026. Who is running an illegal infectious disease lab out of their garage in Las Vegas? Why is the federal government charging people merely observing law enforcement with intimidation? Trump says the worst of the worst. But who is ICE actually targeting? Who is more prone to criminal activity? Immigrants or ICE agents? What country is the USA starving out this week? In what ways does the oppression of Native Americans still manifest? Why can't the pride flag be flown at Stonewall? Has Hamas been telling the truth about the Palestinian death toll this whole time? Why does the Trump administration think a Klansman murdering a civil rights leader is not racist? What are some things you definitely cannot say about ICE? How will New York City be using AI to target the most dangerous criminals of all? Fare evaders. Are you really going to trust Discord with your government ID? All these topics and more in tonight's episode of The People's Report. Timestamps in the episode description.
Well, don't feel so devastated if you're feeling alienated, because it turns out you're not alone. Just open up your heart, let the revolution start, and grab that megaphone. Solidarity, solidarity, I need you and you need me. Solidarity, solidarity, solidarity. Solidarity.
FBI investigates links to biological labs in Las Vegas and California. February 6, 2026, via the New York Times. Federal and local law enforcement officials in Las Vegas are investigating a possible illegal laboratory in a residential subdivision that they say may be linked to another similar investigation in California. In Las Vegas, Ori Solomon, 55, was charged this week with one count of illegal possession of a firearm and with one count of disposing and discharging hazardous waste, the police said. Mr. Solomon was believed to be the property manager at the Las Vegas home, officials said. A lawyer for Mr. Solomon did not immediately respond to a request for comment on Friday. The Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department first became aware of the possible lab after employees of Mr. Solomon reported becoming gravely ill after going into his garage, which contained vials with, quote, reddish liquid, according to a police report. Last month, the Las Vegas police received information that laboratory equipment and potentially hazardous materials were likely being kept at a home in northeast Las Vegas, the police said in a statement. The police said Mr. Solomon was a main agent and conspirator, with someone connected to the investigation into another illegal biological laboratory in Reedley, California. Investigators linked the property owner to a 2023 illegal biological laboratory investigation in Reedley, California, where investigators found materials possibly associated with infectious diseases like hepatitis, COVID-19, HIV, malaria, and other potentially dangerous pathogens in a warehouse, according to the police. Jiabei Zhu, a Chinese citizen, was arrested in October 23 in connection with manufacturing and distributing misbranded medical devices and for making false statements to the Food and Drug Administration. According to court documents, Mr. Zhu and others made, imported, sold, and distributed hundreds of thousands of COVID-19 test kits, as well as tests for HIV, pregnancy, and urine. The Las Vegas police did not know if the same kinds of materials were at the Las Vegas home, but because of the possibility, the department's counterterrorism and hazardous material units, along with the FBI and regional fire agencies, undertook extensive preparations to search the home, the police said. A SWAT team wearing protective equipment carried out the search on January 31st, and brought with them robots that tested air samples as well as monitoring drones. Anthony Capozzi, Zhu's lawyer, told the Associated Press that his client is not involved with any kind of a biolab being conducted in a home in Las Vegas. Mr. Capozzi said Mr. Zhu has been in federal custody for 3 years. A SWAT team found 3 people renting rooms inside the home. The police said they were not involved in the investigation and were safely removed. Investigators focused on the garage and found refrigerators, a freezer, laboratory-type equipment, and numerous containers holding unknown liquid substances, the police said. The items were consistent with what was found in the California investigation. Sheriff Kevin McMail of the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department said at a news conference on January 31st. The police found a significant volume of material, including various vials and storage containers with liquids of different colors and compositions, the sheriff said. Christopher Del Zotto, special agent in charge for the Las Vegas FBI office, said at the news conference that officials found a biosafety hood, biosafety sticker, a centrifuge, red-brown unknown liquids in gallon-sized containers, and refrigerated vials with unknown liquids. He said more than 1,000 samples were taken at the scene. the materials were sent to an FBI lab for further testing. Even an allegation of biohazard material, Mr. Del Soto said, is a serious allegation, adding that the police were not aware that Mr. Solomon had any expertise in the biomedical field. The police said the location was safe and that there were no known dangers to neighbors. Sheriff McMail said a motive remained unclear. I guess actual journalism might be borderline dead based on this article. Almost everything in this article just comes straight from police or FBI or other government reports. Very little of this, if any, of the article is legitimate journalism. It doesn't come from actual journalists or writers or researchers or investigators. Right? It's all just parroting the police. Whatever the police say gets published. The New York Times has long been accused, accurately, of being the mouthpiece of capital and being, the New York war crimes and all that, just constantly regurgitating state talking points with very little original thought or original content. They helped galvanize the American public into accepting the invasion of Iraq, for example. They've been doing a wonderful job at laundering Israeli and American war crimes in the Middle East, especially in Palestine. The list goes on. And now, we're seeing one of the most clear examples of the New York Times just parroting exactly that which the state wants them to say. Now, I'm not saying that they're concealing anything here or that there's stuff that, the police version of the story might be different from the actual version of the story. Just that the amount of times I had to say out loud, according to police reports, or police said, or the FBI said, etc., is grating. And it's just so obvious that, they exist to repeat and to disseminate police information rather than actually investigate. Now, when it comes to, what the truth versus the police version might be, I find it interesting that they're trying to draw connections between this incident and that in California, based on, according to the article, based on basically vibes. And they're trying to portray it as some kind of Chinese conspiracy because a Chinese citizen was involved in the last one a couple years ago and has been in federal prison since. But what's interesting about that framing is that this gentleman, Solomon, his identity is not discussed whatsoever. I'll give you a hint, his illegal firearms possession is because he holds a non-immigrant visa. So he's not legally allowed to possess a firearm within the United States of America. So, he's not an American citizen. So where is he from? Answer is Israel. He entered the United States on an Israeli visa. He holds Israeli and French passports, and that's how he came to the United States. So he's an Israeli operating what seems to be maybe an illegal bio lab out of his house that got people sick from being in it. Now, the article doesn't actually identify any of the stuff that he had. So that, he had biolab equipment, but what he was doing with it is, as of this article, still unclear. What the fluids he had is, I don't believe the article actually identifies any of them. All we know, all it says in here, is about the related one, and the Chinese-run one that had COVID-19, HIV, malaria, and whatnot, and was manufacturing medical devices and tests, counterfeit medical awareness tests. Now, why anyone would be creating and distributing counterfeit COVID tests, I don't know. It could easily be that, they thought they could make one and it'd be cheap and quick and easy. It could be that they want to do some for research. It could be that the gentleman was a scam artist and just wanted to make money based on selling people tests and didn't really matter. I don't know. But the none of the refrigerated vials with unknown liquids have been identified from this article, nor has the origin or motivation of this gentleman been Ori Solomon, that gentleman, have been identified by this article either. I think it speaks to, I hesitate to say negligence on the part of the New York Times, but apathy, certainly. And I do think it's negligent. Actually, I wouldn't even say it's negligent. I think it is intentionally an intentional framing of the situation by identifying the one gentleman as being a Chinese gentleman and suggesting he's an asset, while the other person being an Israeli gentleman is entirely overlooked, especially coming from the New York Times, which time and time again repeats U.S. State Department talking points, denies genocide, encourages the bombing of Gaza, encourages the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians, and overall works on behalf of U.S. empire, especially when it comes to the U.S. colony popularly known as Israel. So, when a gentleman who could sway public opinion against that which the New York Times wants people to support, they're going to pretend that he wasn't involved, or they're going to distance him, or just straight up not identify him as a Israeli. But since the New York Times and of course the U.S. empire wants the American public to be scared of, fearful of, and hateful towards China, they're going to identify Chinese people directly. Hey, if you're enjoying the show, consider supporting us at solidaritytelevision.org. ICE is cracking down on people who follow them in their cars. February 10, 2026, via Huffington Post. Becky Ringstrom was heading home after following federal immigration officers in her gray Kia SUV in suburban Minneapolis, when she was suddenly boxed in by unmarked vehicles. At least half a dozen masked agents jumped out to arrest her, one knocking on her windshield with a metal object, as if threatening to use it to break her window. After the arrest, captured on bystander video verified by Reuters, the 42-year-old mother of 7 later said she was transported to Bishop Henry Whipple Federal Building in Minneapolis, where an officer gave her a citation charging her under a federal law that criminalizes impeding law enforcement. The official said her name and photo would be added to a government database. The arrest of Ringstrom became the latest detention of one of the thousands of local activists for violating Title 18, Section 111 of the U.S. Code, a catch-all charge for anyone who, quote, forcibly assaults, resists, opposes, impedes, intimidates, or interferes with a federal officer conducting official duties. The statute can be charged as a felony or a misdemeanor. As a felony, it carries up to 20 years in prison, but penalties beyond 8 years are reserved for people who use a deadly or dangerous weapon or cause an injury. A Reuters review of federal court records found that the Trump administration has prosecuted at least 655 people under that charge across the U.S. since a series of city-focused immigration crackdowns began last summer. That's more than double the prosecutions during the same period in 2024 to 2025, according to a review of publicly available criminal filings in Westlaw, a legal research database owned by Thomson Reuters. The charges are part of a broader effort by the Trump administration to clamp down on ICE opponents, who they portray as rioters who pose threats to officers and undermine their efforts to arrest immigrants with criminal records. Assaulting and obstructing law enforcement is a felony, said U.S. Department of Homeland Security spokesperson Tricia McLaughlin. She said federal immigration officers use the minimum amount of force necessary to protect themselves, the public, and federal property. ICE has been tracking the names of protesters in an internal database for several months, according to 2 U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement officials who spoke on the condition of anonymity to discuss operations. The government database contains names, photos, actions that provoke suspicion, locations, and license plates, the official said, adding that the effort was intended to spot patterns that could lead to charges. DHS said it does not maintain a database of U.S. domestic terrorists, but does track threats. We do, of course, monitor and investigate and refer all threats, assaults, and obstruction of our officers to the appropriate law enforcement, McLaughlin said. One of the officials said ICE was referring several people per day in Minnesota alone to federal prosecutors for potential charges under the same law for interfering with police operations. White House spokeswoman Abigail Jackson said the Trump administration was committed to protecting First Amendment freedoms, but the people impeding law enforcement will be held accountable to the fullest extent of the law. Well, now they're unsurprisingly trying to arrest people for simply observing law enforcement. Again, this isn't exactly anything new. It's not, again, particularly surprising at all, but it just really does highlight how far they're willing to go to punish people for trying to hold the government and law enforcement accountable. And really, ICE has been not held to account in any measure. Just today, a person was hospitalized after a car accident with ICE, in which ICE agents chased someone that they claim was an illegal immigrant, and they chased him on a high-speed chase through a residential neighborhood in a high pedestrian trafficked area, and it seems that they tried to block off the car, and the person crashed into an ICE vehicle and then into perhaps another vehicle, most likely a civilian vehicle. And of course, the local residents are furious at ICE for putting them all in danger by engaging in these high-speed chases with their cars. And all over the city of the Twin Cities, Minneapolis and St. Paul, people's cars are just being left in the road, from where ICE will box people in and arrest them out of their vehicles and just leave the car right there in the road. And it creates a hazard, of course. It creates a safety issue. And we know that a lot of these people being arrested are not committing any crimes. They are not even immigrants, let alone illegal, so-called illegal immigrants. They are regular people who have simply been caught observing ICE and documenting them and such. This is the situation that people were in when those two white people got killed back in January. They were observers filming ICE and observing their criminal behavior. So simply observing and being a legal observer, a spectator even, can get you in a lot of trouble. And they're straight up claiming it as a federal crime as you are obstructing or intimidating or otherwise interfering with law enforcement activity. And the very idea that watching or recording law enforcement is intimidation or is interference and could be a federal crime should be appalling to, and terrifying to everybody in the United States, just knowing that watching law enforcement do whatever it is that they do could get you in trouble. We already know that people are impersonating ICE in order to get away with crimes, knocking on people's doors, kidnapping them in the streets. I want to say that the two, I think they're Minnesota state government officials who got shot just over a year ago, I think one of them was shot by a person impersonating law enforcement, if not ICE directly. It's definitely law enforcement. And so what does that say about people who would otherwise be filming and recording law enforcement? If doing so puts you at risk of committing a crime, state or a misdemeanor or felony, then you risk opening up the gates for a lot of people to impersonate law enforcement in the act of a crime, and is scaring people into not having evidence of it. If a couple of people want to jack a car and they dress up as ICE, and no one wants to record because they think that they'll be thrown in prison for interference, for obstruction, for intimidation, then the criminals, I don't want to say actual criminals, because obviously law enforcement, especially ICE, are criminals, but the non-law enforcement criminals are going to be empowered to get away with it. So I don't think that's really happening. It probably won't happen, aside from a few isolated incidents. But, ICE is very well known for not having any sort of regimented behavior, any sort of uniform. These guys are slovenly and incredibly sloppy when it comes to dress and appearance. There's no uniformity. There's no attempt to identify as an organized collective. These are, thugs LARPing at being soldiers, playing door kicker, like they wanted to do in Afghanistan, but were too young or too out of shape to be able to do. So, there's no reason to then assume that other slovenly looking mismatched dudes with fake little stickers that say, have goofy slogans, or just straight up say ICE on them, that your mom could have embroidered on a piece of name tape with her sewing machine at home. No reason to believe that these guys aren't real law enforcement. And if, observing these guys gets you in trouble, you're not going to want to do so. Which, of course, is the main point. The creating smokescreen for the criminally minded to commit crimes in fake uniform is not really going to happen, but scaring people into not documenting actual crimes committed by actual law enforcement, which they do all the time, is. And that's the point. So they want to intimidate and they want to prosecute anyone who stops them from doing what they want to do, which is the total ethnic cleansing of Hispanics from the United States of America. Solidarity Television is an independent grassroots news organization. That means we rely exclusively on viewers like you. Support us at solidaritytelevision.org. Leaked DHS document. Tiny fraction of immigrants detained under Trump have violent criminal records. February 9, 2026, via Common Dreams. The DHS report shows only 14% of immigrants taken into custody by ICE in 2025 had either been charged with or convicted of violent criminal offenses. A leaked document obtained by CBS News reveals that only a tiny fraction of immigrants detained by the Trump administration last year have violent criminal records. According to CBS News, the internal U.S. Department of Homeland Security, DHS, documents show that just 14% of immigrants taken into custody by U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, in 2025 had either been charged with or convicted of violent criminal offenses. The DHS report also shows that 40% of immigrants detained last year have no criminal record at all, except for civil immigration law violations, such as living unlawfully in the U.S. or overstaying a visa, which CBS News noted are typically adjudicated by Justice Department immigration judges in civil and not criminal proceedings. The internal document undermines President Donald Trump's past claims that his administration is focused primarily on deporting, quote, the worst of the worst, undocumented immigrants, such as those belonging to criminal gangs. In reality, the document shows less than 2% of immigrants detained last year had any sort of gang affiliation. As noted last month by Aaron Reichlin-Melnick, senior fellow at the American Immigration Council, ICE during Trump's second term has grown more aggressive in detaining people with no prior criminal offenses, save for civil immigration law violations. In January 2024, for example, immigrants with no prior criminal record just accounted for 6% of ICE detainees. By January 25, that percentage surged to 43%. ICE has drastically ramped up its arrests of immigrants in the last year, as White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller has demanded that the agency hit arrest quotas of at least 3,000 per day. While ICE has not yet reached that goal, they did make an estimated 393,000 arrests during Trump's first year back in the White House, an average of more than 1,000 per day. CBS News notes that the internal DHS document does not include arrests by Border Patrol agents, whom the Trump administration has deployed to places far away from the U.S.-Mexico border, like Los Angeles, Chicago, and Minneapolis, where they have undertaken aggressive and sweeping arrest operations, targeting day laborers at Home Depot parking lots and stopping people, including U.S. citizens, to question them about their immigration status. There's one thing that I want to point out about this article, or from within this article, that I feel like the authors might have missed, and certainly, we as readers would probably be willing to overlook. And it is this. In January 2024, immigrants with no prior criminal record accounted for just 6% of ICE detainees. By January 2025, that percentage surged to 43%. Now, Trump won the election in 24, but he wasn't inaugurated until the end of January 2025. So this surge from 6% of immigrants with no criminal record to 43% happened under Joe Biden. It was Joe Biden's final year in office. January, it's easy for us to forget because we're so cued in onto the election cycle, but Joe Biden was in office in 2024. Trump got elected at the end of the year and started his term the following January. Just as in 2016, Trump wasn't president, Obama was. And in 2020, Trump was president, not Biden. It's easy for us to overlook these because of the way that, the whole world, and well, maybe not the whole world, but the United States anyway, engages with these political campaigns. But this is the stuff that was happening under Joe Biden. And even though very few illegal immigrants, so-called, have criminal records, that's not what anyone ever has been pushing for. I've been seeing a lot of discourse, for lack of a better term, online regarding immigration and regarding people's response to ICE. And I've been seeing a lot from Republicans who are saying, well, why didn't you have a problem when Obama or Biden did it? And the answer, of course, is that a lot of people didn't care or didn't know. Maybe you were too young, or maybe you just didn't know any better, and now you're attentive to it. I've been seeing a lot of Democrats, a lot of liberals say things like, well, Obama did it the right way. The phrase I keep seeing is, he wasn't terrorizing neighborhoods. Oh, Biden wasn't terrorizing neighborhoods. First of all, Biden absolutely was terrorizing neighborhoods, especially in Gaza, and Obama especially in Yemen and Syria and Libya. But of course, if we're going to be talking about immigration, it stands to reason that we're referring to American neighborhoods. In which case, yeah, Obama and Biden were terrorizing immigrant neighborhoods. They absolutely were. What they weren't terrorizing were white neighborhoods. White people weren't worried about about immigration enforcement when Obama and Biden were in office, and really the first time around with Trump too. We got a bunch of performative calls to action, but no one really stepped up to do anything. And so the numbers show that Obama and Biden, the Democrats at large, were huge supporters of mass immigration, of mass deportations. And Harris ran a campaign on how she was going to be tougher than Trump when it came to immigrants. This is probably why they started doing their surge on non-criminal immigrants in Biden's last year. To sell this, the Democrats are tough on immigration kind of thing for Harris's hyper-militarized Republican campaign. Harris was a Republican candidate. She would have been an amazing Republican candidate if she were running in 2016, but the Democrats always paved the way for us to get more and more conservative. That's the allegory of the ratchet. The Republicans pull us right and the Democrats keep us from going left. And so, by the time she's running in 2020, mass deportation, mass military action, and all that are all liberal so-called talking points. That's why she lost. But I'm not here to relitigate the election, but rather to point out that ICE has always been a criminal gang. ICE has always been a problem. ICE has always terrorized immigrants ever since they were founded, and ever since they were unleashed to be thugs and goons on the streets of America to punish immigrants for not being white. So again, I think that this is the most important, maybe not the most important, but this is one of the most important sections of this article, is that this activity was going on and this escalation went on when the Democrats were in charge. We're not going to vote our way out of this. We're not going to make all these little blue counties, all these little red counties blue at the end of the year and in November. We're not going to vote enough Democrats in office that, yay, the world is saved. ICE can go back to just beating up regular brown people and ignoring the white ones. No, that's not a solution, and if you really want to be committed to anti-ICE, if you really want to stand up for immigrants rather than against them, you have to understand that ICE, immigration enforcement, these deportations, kids in cages, these were all more than just scandals under Obama and Biden, but they were immoral criminal actions and stains on their legacy. You can't be against ICE today and support it in retrospect in 2010, 2012. Obviously, if you supported it in 2012, it's been 14 years. I'll cut you some slack. I don't know. We live and grow. But, you know, if you were saying, well, if you were saying today, it's bad now, but it was fine then, you're uneducated and you're not really committed to justice or to anti-ICE action. You are committed to being comfortable, and you are committed to supporting your team. You're committed to politics as a team sport, not as a relationship between you and power. Standing up for immigrants today means that you have to stand up for them yesterday and you have to stand up for them tomorrow, whether ICE is being run by a politician in a red tie or a politician in a blue tie. Did you know the People's Report is produced for video and audio platforms? Stay informed by subscribing to us on YouTube or anywhere you listen to podcasts. As ICE expands, an AP review of crimes committed by agents shows how their powers can be abused. February 11, 2026, via apnews.com. At least 24 U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement employees and contractors have been charged with crime since 2020, and their documented wrongdoing includes patterns of physical and sexual abuse, corruption, and other abuses of authority, a review by the Associated Press found. While most of the cases happened before Congress voted last year to give ICE $75 billion to hire more agents and detain more people, experts say these kind of crimes could accelerate given the sheer volume of new employees and their empowerment to use aggressive tactics to arrest and deport people. The Trump administration has emboldened agents by arguing that they have absolute immunity for their actions on duty and by weakening oversight. One judge recently suggested that ICE was developing a troubling culture of lawlessness, while experts have questioned whether job applicants are getting enough vetting and training. Once a person is hired, brought on, goes through the training, and they are not the right person, it is difficult to get rid of them, and there will be a price to be paid later on down the road by everyone, said Gil Kurlakovsky, who served as Commissioner of U.S. Customs and Border Protection from 2014 to 2017. Kurlakovsky said ICE agents are particularly vulnerable to unnecessary use of force issues, given that they often conduct enforcement operations in public while facing protests. With the number of ICE detainees nearly doubling since last year to 70,000, employees and contractors responsible for overseeing them are also facing challenging conditions that can provide more opportunities for misconduct. The Border Patrol doubled in size to more than 20,000 agents from 2004 to 2011, 6 years longer than ICE took. It was embarrassed by a wave of corruption, abuse, and other misconduct by some of the new hires. Kurlakovsky recalled cases of agents who accepted bribes to let cars carrying drugs enter the U.S., or who became involved in human trafficking. He and others say ICE is poised to see similar problems that will likely be broader in scope, with less oversight and accountability. The corruption and the abuse and misconduct was largely confined in the prior instance to along the border and interactions with immigrants and border state residents. With ICE, this is going to be a countrywide phenomenon, as they pull in so many people who are attracted to this mission, said David Beer, Director of Immigration Studies at the Cato Institute, a libertarian think tank. Beer, who has helped publicize some of the recent arrests and other alleged misconduct by ICE agents, said he has been struck by the remarkable array of different offenses and charges that we've seen. AP's review examined public records involving cases of ICE employees and contractors who have been arrested since 2020, including at least 17 who have been convicted and 6 others who are awaiting trial. 9 have been charged in the last year, including an agent cited last month for assaulting a protester near Chicago while off duty. Some of the most serious crimes were committed by veteran ICE employees and supervisors, rather than rookies. While federal officials have justified ICE's aggression, the behavior of agents is drawing scrutiny from cell phone-wielding observers and prosecutors in Democratic-led jurisdictions. Local agencies are looking into last month's fatal shootings in Minneapolis of protesters Renee Good and Alex Preddy by federal agents, as well as the killing of Keith Porter by an off-duty ICE agent in Los Angeles on New Year's Eve. Around the country, the cases have attracted unwelcome headlines for ICE, which has spent millions of dollars publicizing the criminal rap sheets of those they arrest as the worst of the worst. I didn't want to just read at you for like 14 minutes, but I'm going to read to you directly from the AP News article some of the crimes that have been committed by ICE agents abusing their power and authority. Now, we already know about a bunch from last week, such as, was it the East Valley serial rapist being one of them, who, broke into women's homes, tied them up, and sexually abused them. I think it was done to like 8 different people when he was involved in Border Patrol. And then very, very shortly after, or not long after being involved in Border Patrol, he stopped breaking into people's homes. One can only guess as to what he was doing with immigrant women in that time. So I'm going to read to you some other and some more recent events. Assistant ICE Field Office Supervisor in Cincinnati is a 20-year ICE veteran. He's been jailed since his arrest in December on charges he attempted to strangle his girlfriend. He had abused women for years and fractured his girlfriend's hip and nose, causing internal bleeding. Quote from the judge, "The defendant is a volatile and violent individual." ICE says he's considered absent without leave. An ICE employment eligibility auditor told police in Minnesota, "I'm ICE, boys," when he was arrested in November in a sting as he went to meet a person he thought was a 17-year-old prostitute. Alexander Back, of 41, pled not guilty to an attempted enticement of a minor. He's on administrative leave. Does not say whether or not he's an paid or unpaid administrative leave. When officers in suburban Chicago found a man passed out in a crashed car in October, they were surprised to discover that the driver was an ICE officer who had recently completed his shift at a detention center and had his government firearm in the vehicle. They arrested this gentleman for driving under the influence, Guillermo Diaz-Torres, by the way, and he's pled not guilty and is on administrative duty pending an investigation. This doesn't say that he was drunk. I feel like one can assume that he was probably drunk if he was passing out and crashing cars. Driving under the influence. It doesn't say specifically alcohol or what other drugs he might have been on. After an ICE officer in Florida was stopped for driving drunk with his 2 children in the car in August, great job there, really protecting the children, tried to get out of charges by pointing to his law enforcement and military service. When that failed, he demanded to know whether one of the deputies arresting him was Haitian and threatened to check the man's immigration status, according to body camera video. So, using abuse of power and then threatening people of color with the influence and power that they have in order to get out of trouble for, again, drunk driving with children in the car. As if drunk driving wasn't bad enough. A direct quote from Scott Deseroth, the ICE agent. "I'll run him once I get out of here, and if he's not legit, he's taking a ride back to Haiti." He's sentenced to probation and community service and is on administrative leave. And then force and abuse. Former top official at an ICE contract facility in Texas was sentenced to probation on February 4th after acknowledging he grabbed a handcuffed detainee by the neck and slammed him into a wall. Prosecutors downgraded the charge from a felony to a misdemeanor. A pattern that we'll see often repeated amongst law enforcement and military is a deference to this authority, where when people with power get into trouble, especially in the military, but also in law enforcement, they often get away with either reduced charges or get away with it altogether. I say especially in the military because law enforcement will often defer to military police and authority, which will then try to sweep it under the rug. This is particularly bad with more elite so-called forces, but of course this happens locally in your local police department all the time. How many police officers get pulled over for driving drunk and then let go or taken home rather than what you and I would do? Not that you or I would ever drive drunk, but they would throw us in jail, even if they suspected that we were driving under the influence. In December, an ICE contractor pled guilty to sexually abusing a detainee at a detention facility in Louisiana. I believe we actually covered this recently. Prosecutors said the man had sexual encounters with a Nicaraguan national over a 5-month period in 2025, as he instructed other detainees to act as lookouts. Outside Chicago, an off-duty ICE agent has been charged with misdemeanor battery for throwing to the ground a 68-year-old protester who was filming him at a gas station in December. He said he was acting in self-defense. An ICE officer in Houston was indicted last summer on charges that he repeatedly accepted cash bribes from bail bondsmen. That's a good thing that wasn't on the teleprompter. In exchange for removing detainers ICE had placed on their clients, targeting for deportation. ICE said the officer was indefinitely suspended, at least. He pled not guilty, but at the very least, one of these guys is getting in trouble. Prosecutors say a former supervisor in ICE's New York City office provided confidential information about people's immigration statuses to acquaintances and made an arrest in exchange for gifts and other gain. He was arrested in November 2024 and pled not guilty and is awaiting trial. 2 Utah-based ICE investigators were sentenced to prison last year. Again, thank God some of these people are getting consequences. For a scheme in which they made hundreds of thousands of dollars stealing synthetic drugs known as bath salts from government custody and selling them through government informants. Again, this is pretty common in law enforcement and in the military. A lot of these groups act as cartels or are connected to cartels in and of themselves. And once drugs are entered into custody, if they are ever logged as evidence, it's not uncommon for them to end up on the streets and cash in the pockets of law enforcement. In 2022, ICE supervisor Kobe Williams was arrested and sting by police in Othello, Washington, while going to a hotel room to meet who he thought was a 13-year-old girl he'd arranged to pay for sex. He had driven his government vehicle, which was filled with cash, alcohol, pills, and Viagra, and was carrying his ICE badge and loaded government firearm. The 22-year ICE veteran offered a rationale that turned out to be a lie. He was there to rescue the girl as part of a trafficking investigation. He is now in prison. So, at every turn, we're seeing these ICE guys use their power and privilege to, A, commit crimes of abuse, especially against vulnerable populations. Not just, of course, crimes of abuse against immigrants who are already a vulnerable population, but particularly against women and girls, and using their authority and power in order to get out of it or try to get out of it. Now, of course, all the ones we read from today are people who didn't get away with the abuse. Either they got caught and are being investigated, or they got caught and got in trouble, or it just made known to the public that they were committing these abuses. Now imagine all of the guys who aren't getting caught and who are getting away with it. We can only imagine the violence, especially sexual violence, committed against people in ICE custody who no one is going to speak up for. No one is going to look out for the vulnerable and protect them from these ICE goons, from the Gestapo, from the violence perpetrated by the state amongst a poor and desperate population who have no recourse. It's no accident that a number of these people who were caught were getting involved in prostitution, in the purchasing of prostitutes in particular, in the renting of a human person, the renting of a human body in order to abuse it for personal gratification. There's already a disengagement from, I don't want to say the human condition, but a disengagement from the human experience when you get to the point where you believe that it is acceptable to purchase or rent a human body. And so once you're at that stage, which most of these people are at, what else are you going to do with other people that you see as morally justified, that you see yourself as being morally justified in violating and abusing, such as immigrants? If you like the People's Report, check out our other shows at solidaritytv.org. AOC says Trump administration's Cuba blockade is part of a new era of depravity. February 10, 2026, via Latin Times. Democratic Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez criticized the Trump administration's oil blockade on Cuba, saying it illustrates a new era of depravity. The lawmaker made the remark after being asked for a reaction to an article from Dropsite News, which claimed that Secretary of State Marco Rubio is deceiving Trump about there being high-level talks with Cuban officials. This is what we've seen with Gaza, a new era of depravity. There used to be, or there was a stated commitment on human rights, where innocent civilians were almost exempt from blockades. And now it's almost acceptable for the Western world to look the other way as people are starved or deprived because they find political actors or regimes to be objectionable, she said. What we're seeing is a possible precipice of hospitals running out of fuel. Innocent children and women could be put in harm's way. It's incumbent upon all of us to defend human rights no matter where, she added. Other Democrats have criticized the policy over the past days. Representative Ilhan Omar said the Trump administration's goal is to crush the Cuban people, manufacture a humanitarian catastrophe, and force regime change at any cost. It is unconscionable and cruel. We must stop it, Omar added. Last week, Representative Chuy Garcia said that for 65 years, the U.S. has maintained an embargo against Cuba, deliberately starving civilians in the hopes that their desperation triggers an uprising. He went on to claim that the tariffs could force more migration and argued against them. Cuba poses no threat to the United States, but that's not the point. Trump is manufacturing an excuse for cruelty and regime change, he concluded. Dropsite News detailed that Rubio's deceiving Trump about talks as part of his scheme to overthrow the Havana regime. It cited a senior Trump official noting that Trump is making claims about there being talks because that's what Marco is telling him. The official went on to say that Rubio's plan is making a claim in the future that talks failed because Havana refused to compromise. The State Department rejected the notion. As the president stated, we are talking to Cuba, whose leaders should make a deal. Cuba is a failing nation whose rulers have had a major setback with the loss of support from Venezuela and with Mexico ceasing to send them oil, an official said in a statement. A Cuban official also told the outlet that there are no talks underway, but they are eager to begin. At the moment, we've had some exchanges of messages. We cannot say we have set a bilateral dialogue at this moment, Cuban Deputy Foreign Affairs Minister Carlos Fernandez de Castillo recently told CNN. It's not the most popular opinion, I know, but it's awfully rich to hear Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez talk about how terrible it is that the United States is oppressing Palestine and oppressing Cuba, when she's all for voting for weapons to be sent to Israel to kill Palestinians. She's voted for it on the past. She's abstained in the only, when she had the very clear moral choice of voting against weapons to Israel. And she always tries to brush it under the rug as, oh, well, I'm sending defensive weapons, as if such a thing exists. So, her track record on Gaza is, I don't want to say abysmal, because there are a lot of people who are way worse, but, we're talking about shooting a child 351 times versus shooting a child 6 times. It's still, you're still the party of shooting children. And Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is still the politician who supports shooting, bombing, killing, and raping children, and as long as those children are Palestinian. But she is correct that the United States is, abusing Cuba, and in similar ways in which they're doing in Palestine. I just wish she cared about that rather than just using it as a soapbox, if you will. But she is right that, this is a new era of an act of depravity. I wouldn't call it a new era of depravity, simply because this is exactly what the United States have been doing, particularly to Cuba, for years. We cut ties with Cuba in 1961 after the Cuban Revolution, and we supported Batista long before that. We occupied Cuba back in the Spanish-American War, which was 1898, if I recall correctly, right around the turn of the century. And we took Cuba, we let the mafia run wild, we used it as a playground for the rich and the capitalists, and finally, when the Cubans had enough, we decided to sanction them, blockade them, bomb them, starve them, cut their fuel, cut their food, and cut their medical access, etc., etc., etc. We ran a terror campaign. We tried to invade Cuba. We did pretty much everything you can think of. We tried to have their government assassinated. We tried to turn the people against them. And now, in the current course of events, is we're trying to create a situation so terrible that the people have to beg the U.S. for mercy and throw in the towel. And our attack on Venezuela, of course, helped make that happen. I have some criticisms of Machado in... Not Machado. I have a lot of criticisms of Machado. Of Sheinbaum in Mexico for not shipping oil to Cuba, but we'll have to see how that lands. I know she's under a huge threat from the United States at the moment, as is. So, again, it's kind of like a why doesn't Iran do more to bomb Israel situation, where I wish that they were doing more. They're in a geopolitically interesting, to put it politely, spot in which I understand why some things are happening. Just today, however, they're loading up ships with emergency humanitarian relief to bring to Venezuela or to Cuba. But the ending of fuel supply is potentially catastrophic for the Cuban people and potentially the Cuban way of life. And the only thing that Cuba's ever done wrong is demand its own sovereignty, demand that it be allowed to choose for itself how it operates and how the Cuban people live their lives. All they've demanded ever from the United States is dignity. The United States won't let them have that because there is no dignity to be had under capitalism because it steals power from the capitalists. Dignity is a prize that can be awarded to good, obedient people. Of course, that level of dignity is minuscule. And Cuba's determination to remain free and independent and their commitment to humanitarian efforts and anti-imperialist efforts around the globe have put them in the sights of the United States, put the target on their backs since the 1960s, starting with Kennedy. And, well, starting before Kennedy with Eisenhower. And then, of course, escalating with Kennedy and then everyone else since. The closest thing we got to respite was under Obama, of all people, who's, major imperialist and a major supporter of racist bombings of the Middle East. So I guess, some broken clock can be right twice a day kind of thing. And that is the situation of Cuba. At the moment, it's looking real bad. Fuel shortages could see a reduction in not just power, but in essential power. Health and human services related power, food production, etc., etc. And the United States is more than willing to do everything it can to hurt these people. And no one in the West is willing to stand up for them because of the immense power and influence that the United States has. There's a lot of talk in liberal and even leftist circles about agency, about the agency that countries have, and about how, if you're saying that the United States pressured or forced them into this position, you're denying their agency. This is one of those examples where agency exists relative to power. Why doesn't Mexico just do whatever it wants? Because it shares a huge border with the United States, has threatened them with mass sanctions, and already is in a precarious position because of the extreme levels of violence the United States is willing to wage against them. We see this with the cartels, which are overwhelmingly funded by U.S. both citizens and even U.S. military assets. Not to mention the secret war and the dirty wars in Mexico that the United States covertly funded to destroy left-wing thought in Mexico. The United States literally just flew in and kidnapped the president of a sovereign state right on the Caribbean Ocean. And, no one lifted a finger to do anything about it. So, these countries, Cuba, Mexico, and others are in a very precarious situation, placed there by the hegemonic power of the United States and their mass influence in global finance, which is one of the key aspects of imperialism and the U.S. global empire. This week's book recommendation is What is to be Done by Vladimir Lenin. In this work, Lenin makes his argument for an organized revolutionary party in order to educate and agitate the working class and elevate their class consciousness. Man could avoid more prison time with guilty plea in Navajo woman's disappearance. January 30th, 2026, via The Independent. A man charged in connection to the 2021 disappearance of a Navajo woman pled guilty Thursday to robbery, marking the latest turn in a case that has been emblematic of the epidemics of killings and disappearances in Native American communities. Preston Henry Tolth appeared before a federal judge in Phoenix. Tolth, who has been in custody since 2023, will not spend any additional time in prison if the court accepts the terms of the plea agreement reached with prosecutors. Prosecutors allege that Tolth assaulted Ella-Mae Begay, stole her Ford F-150 pickup truck, and drove it across state lines. In the plea agreement, he admitted to punching Begay in the face several times and leaving her on the side of the road before selling her truck for money and drugs. Begay's case helped bring national attention to the high rate of violence faced by Native people, providing fuel for tribal leaders and victim advocates as they continued pushing for law enforcement resources and more cooperation for investigation across jurisdictional lines. There have been marches, listening sessions, and congressional hearings in recent years, and federal authorities have funneled more investigators and prosecutors to field offices in key locations around the United States in hopes of solving cases and prosecuting offenders. Still, Begay has never been found, and her family remains heartbroken. Known in her community as a master rug weaver, Begay lived in Sweetwater, Arizona, a town on the Navajo Nation not far from the Four Corners Monument. Gerald Begay, the eldest of her 3 children, remembered his mother as someone who was always willing to lend a hand, even to a stranger. Gerald Begay listened to Thursday's court proceedings via phone from Denver. He called the plea deal a slap on the wrist for Tolth and said mistakes made by law enforcement during interrogations cost his family a just outcome. Gerald Begay called on authorities to find his mother's remains. She belongs in the community where she resided, he said. If I could bring my mother home, I could at least have some closure. Timothy Corchain, the interim U.S. Attorney for the District of Arizona, declined a request for an interview. Attorneys representing Tolth did not respond to a request for comment. Tolth initially entered a plea of not guilty to assault and carjacking resulting in serious bodily injury, charges that carry a maximum penalty of 10 and 25 years in prison respectively. In August 2025, a federal appeals court ruled that a confession made by Tolth was not admissible in court because officers did not honor his decision to stop speaking during the interrogation and instead persuaded him to waive his right to remain silent. A sentencing hearing is scheduled for April 9th in Phoenix. Maybe not in our circles, but I get the impression that a lot of people take for granted the existence of particularly white Americans in North America. And I think that the sheer violence and brutality inflicted upon the Native Americans gets a cursory acceptance from the general public, maybe at least just over on the East Coast where it's less visible day to day. And very little thought goes into the fact that the genocide of the Native Americans is an ongoing, continued project, rather than something that happened in the past and is just now too late to reverse. There is no justice for crimes committed against Native American people. Most of the time, crimes against particularly Indigenous women and girls are committed by people who are not Indigenous and get away with it. One of the big reasons is a lack of interaction between law enforcement on, say, reservations and then off reservations, or the fact that the government just does not care. I'm going to read to you some statistics about the experience of Native women in the United States. Indigenous women are murdered at a rate 10 times higher than all other ethnicities. In Canada, it's a little better, with Indigenous women being murdered at a rate only 6 times higher than that of other ethnicities. Murder is the third leading cause of death for Indigenous women. More than 4 out of 5 Indigenous women have experienced violence, 84%. 56% of Indigenous women have experienced sexual violence. 55% of Indigenous women have been physically abused by their intimate partners. 48%, almost 49, 48.8% of Indigenous women have been stalked in their lifetime. Indigenous women are 1.7 times more likely than white women to experience violence. Indigenous women, or as the article correctly points out, Anglo-American women. Indigenous women are twice as likely to be raped than white women. And Indigenous women are 3 times more likely to be murdered than Anglo-American women. The violence of the system against Indigenous people, especially against women, is unthinkable. And there's stereotypes about Native American men or Native American lifestyles in general. The first time I ever encountered like actual hateful racism against Native Americans, I was blown away by A, how openly racist people actually were, and B, again, I never experienced, well, I never observed, I should say, obviously I've never experienced, but I've never observed anything short of institutional racism against Native Americans. Because of course, racism against Native Americans is literally one of the foundations of the United States of America. The entire country was built on the genocide of the Native Americans, and which cleared the way for the enslavement of Africans to build what the white people wanted. But there are a lot of people in this country who have legitimate racial hatred towards Native Americans. And the reason why I emphasize it like this is that, again, in my life and experience, I did not encounter anyone who felt negatively about Native Americans as a people group until very recently. I want to say within the last 3 years. Obviously, I like most other people had heard. I don't want to talk too much about like my experience, but I feel like this might be a little bit emblematic of a lot of people. Obviously, you know, we've heard people say stuff like, "Oh, well, the United States was conquered, not stolen," or you know, whatever nationalistic bullshit that they say to make themselves feel better. But there is legitimate hatred towards Native Americans, in the same way you'd find hatred against Hispanics or blacks or any other ethnic group in the United States, and has institutional power behind it. People who hate Native Americans kill them, and they get away with it. People legitimately feel that one of the reasons why Native Americans get targeted by groups like ICE is not just because they look Hispanic, but because they are an at-risk people group who can be abused with borderline impunity. People, especially in like the Midwest and the West, and I'm sure, you know, over on the East as well, there are significantly reduced numbers of Native Americans here. People in the West and the Midwest feel that, well, Native Americans are stealing my tax dollars, kind of bullshit. And they commit atrocities against Native Americans. And the government is totally disinterested in stepping in. Part of the reason is that Native Americans live on areas that have natural resources they want to exploit, or that the people who are committing the abuses are people like oil pipeline workers, especially, say, up in Alaska, who can do so, and, well, their labor is needed, or they're being policed by private security companies who don't really give a shit, etc., etc., etc. I've also noticed that there's a lack of disunity amongst, there's lack of disunity amongst people of color in the United States, but I've seen racial hatred from Black Americans against Native Americans who blame them for slavery, because there were Native American groups that, in an attempt to assimilate into whiteness to avoid genocide, unfortunately adopted the institution of chattel slavery in the South, which was objectively wrong. And they obviously, I don't need to elaborate on how it was bad to own slaves. Obviously, if you're watching the video, you're probably in agreement on that. All slavers should have been executed on the spot. Big problem in the United States today is that we did not just kill all of the people who owned slaves in the South. We should have. Every single one. That's a different topic. But because of this racial hatred, because of the institutionalized racism against Native Americans, what ends up happening is that a lot of Native Americans, especially people who live on reservations, have low job and economic opportunity and poor health, poor mental health, and little resources. So, what do people do? And of course, I'm talking really broad, big picture stuff. What do people do across the board when they are suffering from the pains of poverty, neglect, and abuse? Drugs and alcohol. That's why you'll go into Kensington in Philadelphia and find a ton of people hopped up on drugs, same as you would in other places in the world. The alcohol is a very prevalent medication for the pains of poverty. And so, this is where some of those stereotypes come from. This is where some of these statistics of women being abused come from. It's not because Native American men are particularly abusive or misogynistic or blah, 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 blah. It is because Native Americans in the United States and Canada, and probably in Mexico and Central America and in South America, but specifically in the United States, live in quite literally a post-apocalyptic society where their population was obliterated intentionally, often intentionally. Their homes were destroyed very intentionally, and they were thrown into open-air concentration camps, much like Gaza or the West Bank, where they are given a pretend sovereignty and are given token care from the federal government, which is just used as a pacification and a cover-up for the crimes of genocide and ethnic cleansing and racial hatred brought about by the white supremacist United States of America and inflicted upon a people group who are still suffering from this exact same colonial violence, hatred, and racism that began when Christopher Columbus landed in Hispaniola in 1492. Hey comrades, remember the words of Chairman Mao: civilize the mind and make savage the body. In order to outperform ICE, we must first match their physical fitness standards. If it makes sense for you, start training with sprinting in order to achieve a 220-yard sprint in 48 seconds or less. Trump administration removes rainbow flag from Stonewall National Monument. February 9, 2026, via Gay City News. The Trump administration removed a large rainbow flag from a flagpole at the Stonewall National Monument. The National Park Service confirmed to Gay City News on February 9th, marking the latest example of the president's broader effort to erase the queer community from the birthplace of the modern LGBTQ rights movement. Gay City News contacted the National Park Service on the evening of February 9th to inquire about why the rainbow flag was removed from the Stonewall National Monument, which sits at Christopher Park near the Stonewall Inn and was designated as a national monument by former President Barack Obama in 2016. Under government-wide guidance, including General Services Administration policy and Department of the Interior direction, only the U.S. flag and other congressionally or departmentally authorized flags are flown on NPS-managed flagpoles, with limited exceptions, a spokesperson for the National Park Service told Gay City News on the evening of February 9th. Menendez wondered why the flag was removed now, not back when the Trump administration was removing transgender and bisexual references from the park. "I didn't anticipate this happening at this very moment," Menendez said. "I was just in the park 3 days ago, making sure the flags were stable." However, The U.S. Department of the Interior posted new guidance on January 21st, stipulating that only the U.S. flags of the Department of the Interior, and the prisoners of war missing in action flag will be flown by the National Park Service. The list of exemptions includes flags that provide historical context, such as an earlier version of the U.S. flag at a historic fort, are part of a historic reenactment or living history programs, and other examples. In a written statement to Gay City News, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer of New York ripped the Trump administration and predicted that the flag would return. Mayor Zoran Mamdani said he was outraged by the flag's removal, saying acts of erasure will never change or silence the history of the Stonewall National Monument. The administration subsequently erased bisexual representation from the site, further angering community members. Last year, the Trump administration also decided it no longer wanted the existing large rainbow flag, which incorporated black and brown stripes and colors drawn from the trans flag, a move consistent with the administration's broader erasure of trans individuals and its rejection of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Instead, it only allowed the standard rainbow flag on the flagpole. Menendez took issue with the National Park Service's point that limited exceptions can be made for certain flags, but apparently not rainbow flags. I wonder why the flag is not a limited exception, he said. It also stood out that the National Park Service noted that the Stonewall National Monument will continue to preserve and interpret the site's historic significance, given that the administration has distorted LGBTQ history by censoring references to transgender and bisexual people. I think all of their actions are going to backfire, Menendez said. Well, what do we come to expect from an administration that cares more about Stonewall Jackson than Stonewall National Monument? The removal of the pride flag, the removal of bisexual from it, it's just kind of confusing to me. I don't know. I mean, they scrubbed the trans stuff off, which was equally offensive and upsetting, but I guess I saw that one coming a little more clearly. Not to justify it, but just it was less surprising. It's just, as the article says, and as you already know, and as everyone else already recognized, it's just a straight-up attack on the existence of LGBTQ people. That's all it is. They want to erase that section of history as much as they can, and they want to do it slowly and piecemeal, so that way either people don't notice that it's happening, or that they do notice and it's too much for them to be able to stop. They have to fight every single battle bit by bit by bit. Removing it altogether might be a little bit more challenging, but saying, hey, you can't say bisexual anymore, or hey, you can't have the flag up there. These are all things that they can do and have their own small little victories, I guess, against the queer population of the United States and of the world at large. This isn't a battle that should have to be fought. It shouldn't have had to have been fought in the first place, but it was. I mean, that's kind of what the Stonewall National Monument is all about. And, I don't know, it's more than just insulting. It's insulting to intelligence as well. And I can't even say, it's a disgrace anymore, because really, what are we disgracing? The Trump administration, the United States of America? Yeah, these two things that hold so much value in the world, that we hold with such sanctity that this is disgraceful for it. Honestly, flying the pride flag next to an American flag might even be more offensive to gay rights than removing the pride flag. And of course, Trump's choice of flag in the first place, of the, you can't have the progress flag, so I believe it's officially called. You can't have the progress flag, you have to have the traditional gay flag. Just another step in that direction. Now they can't have the flag at all. And yeah, these rules are arbitrary. Of all the places to have, alternative flags, or whatever the official language of the article was in these instances, I feel like, Stonewall is a pretty apt location for the pride flag to be flown by a government body. But I don't know. I guess there's not a whole lot to say in terms of surprise or, what is their specific term for this? Whatever their a limited exception. I don't think anyone expected anything more. I think we were all just hopeful that they were just going to not do anything more to it. But after they, had them scrub trans off everything, and then, I changed the progress flag to the rainbow flag, or, whatever else. I guess we kind of all could have seen that this was coming. Again, the bisexual thing is the most surprising because it feels out of nowhere. But I digress. What I want to point out is if we're going to be flying flags, the fact that we're still allowed to fly the prisoner of war missing in action flag is absurd. For those of you who don't know, the prisoner of war missing in action flag, the PAL-MIA flag, if you will, came about in order to, in the late 70s, in order to pressure the government, the U.S. government, into recovering the American prisoners of war who are being held as slave labor in Vietnam. Now, if your reaction is, wait, what? What do you mean slave labor in Vietnam? That is exactly what the Vietnamese said. The prisoners of war missing in action flag was built off a conspiracy theory that was proven untrue by the Republican Party themselves. Like John McCain specifically went to go confirm that this myth was fake. Was that people who are missing in action, which was a brand new category, by the way, created by the U.S. federal government in order to avoid paying reparations for the Vietnam War. Just so you know, like missing in action was invented after the Vietnam War in order to propagate this. It's this myth that soldiers who didn't come home were missing in action, this new mystical category. That basically could say, oh, we don't know where they are. Maybe they're being held as slaves by Vietnam, so we're not going to pay. And we learned, Rambo 2, by the way, is built off this myth, if you saw that, and they also propagated it. There are no prisoners of war, of American prisoners of war. There are none. On the earth, there's not a single U.S. soldier being held as a prisoner of war. And there are no soldiers missing in action. I don't think there have been for years. Because again, missing in action is an entirely fake thing that they made up. So the fact that they fly this flag, which is nowadays supposed to be like, oh, remember the troops or whatever the fuck. It's entirely about dodging reparations for Vietnam. It's based on myth and fabrication that wove its way into American society through far-right conservatism in order to get people to still feel sad about the bullshit that we put the Vietnamese through in Vietnam, well, obviously. And yet that flag is allowed to fly at federal sites. We can still pretend that there are prisoners of war somewhere and that I'm supposed to feel bad about them in the first place, even if they existed. And we're supposed to feel all sad about, the missing in action. And we're supposed to be, remember the troops. And it's entirely fictional, based on a mythology created in the 70s, propagated by an action movie, the sequel to a pretty decent action movie, but an action movie, in order to avoid paying debts to Vietnam, that has just become so entrenched in our militaristic nationalist culture that we can still fly that. It's in government buildings. I've seen it literally flying above schools and in city halls. Like it's worthy of respect. Like it's even real. You might as well fly, I don't know, the flag of the Star Wars Rebellion or some fly an Autobot flag or something. I don't know. Another fictional flag for a fictional story. It's a fandom flag, is what it is. But of course, an actual flag that represents actual people, an actual struggle, an actual persecution, the pride flag, or the progress flag, the rainbow flag, whatever you want to, whichever one of the flags you want to pick, those aren't allowed. Flags that represent actual people, actual stories, aren't allowed at the places in which those actual people and actual stories took place. In order to, of course, oppress and marginalize gay people, well, LGBT people, more. But we'll fly fictional flags from Rambo 2 above state houses and schools. Explain that one to me, federal government. It'd mean a lot if you join our Patreon at solidaritytelevision.org. IDF accepts Gaza Health Ministry's death toll of over 71,000 Palestinians killed during the war. January 29, 2026, via Haaretz. Although many international experts have accepted the health ministry's data as reliable and even conservative relative to the true death toll, Israel had refused to accept the health ministry's count until now. The IDF has accepted the estimate of the Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry that approximately 71,000 Palestinians were killed during the Israeli-Gaza war, noting that the number does not include missing residents who are potentially buried under rubble. The IDF also said it is currently analyzing the data on the dead to see how many of them are combatants and how many are civilians. According to the Gaza Health Ministry, 71,667 Gazans have been killed by IDF fire since the beginning of the war on October 7, 2023. The ministry's tally includes only those killed directly by Israeli military fire and its tracking, not people who died of starvation or from diseases exacerbated by the war. The records published by the Gaza Ministry of Health identify over 90% of the bodies by name and identification numbers, but do not distinguish between militants and civilians. The data published by the Health Ministry regarding the dead and wounded in the Gaza Strip have since been examined since the beginning of the war by many international organizations, governments, media outlets, and researchers, and there is broad agreement that they are reliable. Nevertheless, Israel has never accepted the number, and the Foreign Ministry has even called it misleading and unreliable. However, Israel has not refuted the data with contradictory information, and several studies have even raised the possibility that the death toll in Gaza is even higher than the Health Ministry reports. In June of 2025, a study was released concluding that, as of January of that year, some 75,200 Gazans had died of violent death during the war, contradicting the Health Ministry's count of around 55,000 dead. At the time, more and more international experts concluded that the Health Ministry's data is reliable and may even be very conservative. Surprise of the century. Israel was lying the whole time, and Palestine wasn't. Wow. Color me surprised. I'm so shocked. I'm floored. The Hamas was telling the truth. Who could have thought it? And the fact that Western media ran with this notion for the last 2 years, is more than 2 years at this point, is an insult to our intelligence and just outright sickening. You know, the New York Times was always trying to pretend that the death toll wasn't what it was, that people weren't actually being killed in Palestine. If they were evil Hamas soldiers. Wow. As if Hamas isn't the most moral fighting force on the fucking planet right now. And, you know, Israel is always like, oh, well, you know, not that many people have died. We've just been carpet bombing this dense city the size of Philadelphia with over 1 million more people in it, nonstop for 2 years. And, you know, now they're admitting, oh, well, you know, maybe the death toll is accurate. But, you know, where are all the retractions from the New York Times? Where are the retractions from the BBC, from everybody else who pretended that Palestinians weren't being killed, and if they were, it was either on accident or a rarity, or they deserved it? Where are those retractions? Where are those apologies? We're not going to see them, of course, because it's all well and good to say, oh, well, yeah, maybe we fucked up after people are dead, but, you know. And, of course, we already know that these numbers, 72,000 people killed, are huge undercounts. We know that. Not just from the famine conditions, not just from people being buried under the rubble, but the fact is that it was at, I want to say 34,000 people killed by like January 2024, and we're 2 years past. The loss of life has been catastrophic. There are estimates from, I think, The Lancet, a leading medical journal, that had over 200,000 deaths by the end of 2024, if I remember correctly. There's another article recently that said there's over 400,000 people dead by now. And so the 72,000, 70,000 count is a dramatic undercount. This is why, of course, Israel was bombing reporters and hospitals and all that in order to destroy the ability to keep records and to record what was happening. So that way, people like you and I don't understand or could more easily ignore the realities on the ground in Palestine. And of course, the Western media is also willing to say, oh, well, in the course of 4 days, 90,000 Iranians were killed in protesting. Like, sure, man, yeah, we totally believe you. And then, 4 days of protests or whatever in Iran has 90,000 dead, but 2 years of carpet bombing a prison has fewer people dead. Sure. Either Israel is really, really bad at killing people, which we know that they aren't when those people are unarmed, or someone's lying, or, the numbers are just, Hamas has just been unable to accurately give a tally and have to do low estimates. Of course, we do know that Israel's boys in green are dog shit fighters. They get washed every single time they actually have to fight anybody. And their arrogance keeps getting them liquidated. They'll see a Palestinian flag out in the middle of a field and they'll think, oh, this is definitely isn't booby-trapped like the last 16 times. They'll go out and just get vaporized. Sucks to suck, wouldn't be me. So, if Israel, in a one-to-one fight, the Israelis lose because they're dog shit soldiers. You see a couple of armed and armored Israeli soldiers tumbling down backwards down the stairs like roly-polies, one after another, because there are 12 of them on one Hamas militant. And like, okay, well, no wonder they wear diapers all the time. Anyway, that's not really the point, but they are absolute dog shit soldiers. That's why they get washed all the time. Hamas can, a lone Hamas fighter can clear 2 tanks. We've all seen it. So, which is why they resort to mass terror bombing campaigns. They've already killed over 500 people since the so-called ceasefire last year, and really just last fall. It's only been 4 months, I think. And they've killed 500 people. And that's during a ceasefire. Right now, they continue to just bomb random people in Palestine. Every single time they see anyone that they believe is a Hamas fighter, they kill them. There are Hamas soldiers trapped underground in Rafah, and Israel kills them every single time. Israel bombs them every single time they try to leave the tunnels, even despite the ceasefire, and despite the fact that they are supposed to be, going out to go and rejoin the rest of society. So, yeah, the 12 days that Iran was bombing them were the greatest 12 days of our lives. And the Western media needs to... Obviously, the Western media has continued to pretend that the genocide isn't happening because they are the mouthpiece of empire, because they serve empire, not the people. They do not serve the truth. Washington Post pretends democracy dies in darkness, which might be true, but they're certainly happy to kill democracy by smothering it with a pillow. They work for capital. They're the mouthpiece of capital. The New York War Crimes works for capital. They are imperialists. They are rabid imperialists. They are gleeful imperialists. So we're never going to see them report the truth until it's too late. And, one day all these guys will have always been against it. There are, where were the retractions for the fact that the New York Times helped make the invasion of Iraq happen. Where's the apologies for that? Where are the lessons learned from that? None. Because, of course, their mission is not to tell the truth. Their mission is to support the U.S. empire in all of its endeavors, one of those endeavors being the genocide of the Palestinians. That is an American endeavor that is commanded from the White House and the Pentagon, and more accurately, from Wall Street. It's not just an Israeli endeavor. Israel is the militia of the United States. They are beholden to the United States. They use American bombs. They use American troops. Let's be real. Half these dudes are coming from Brooklyn. They're Americans with American guns, American bombs, American munitions, American targeting, American AI programs to select random Lebanese and Palestinian people to kill with impunity. Western cover, American aircraft carriers being used to oppress or attempt to oppress Yemen. American sanctions to crush Iran and the north of Korea, which has been a huge ally to Palestine, in order to prevent them from helping the Palestinian people, in order to continue the eradication of the Palestinian people on behalf of the U.S. empire, of which Israel is simply a garrison within it. This is an American project, and that is why American, but in general, Western news sources are not going to report the truth until it's too late. If the New York Times, if AP News, if all of these other so-called news organizations had accurately been calling the genocide of the Palestinians for what it was, maybe the American people would have stood up to stop it. Maybe. Tough call. Everyone knows what happened to the Native Americans and no one gives a shit. So, I'm not super optimistic. But it's no surprise, and it should be no surprise to you, that Hamas was telling the truth this entire time. Israel and the West were lying. So just keep that in mind whenever you see the next article about Hamas, about Palestine, about Iran, etc., etc. Who's lying, who's always been lying, and who's always been telling the truth. Another way you can support us is by following us on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and anywhere you listen to podcasts. Minnesota activist Kyle Wagner arrested and charged with threatening ICE agents. February 5, 2026, via CBS News. A Minnesota activist was arrested Thursday and charged with threatening to assault and kill Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents, the Justice Department said. Prosecutors allege that Kyle Wagner, 37, shared comments and videos to Facebook and Instagram last month that encouraged his followers to attack federal immigration officers, who he called the Gestapo and murderers. He is expected to make his initial appearance in federal court on Thursday. Photos taken Thursday appear to show Wagner being led out of a residential building in Minneapolis by agents with Homeland Security investigations, part of the Department of Homeland Security, wearing a sweatshirt that says, "I'm Antifa." Antifa is short for anti-fascist, and it's a loosely organized left-wing movement or ideology. In one now-deleted video posted on January 8th, Wagner allegedly threatened ICE agents, stating, "We're fucking coming for you," according to the Justice Department. The following day, he allegedly encouraged followers to harass immigration officers and said, "We should cripple them. Anywhere we have an opportunity to get our hands on them, we need to put our hands on them," he said, according to prosecutors. Wagner's social media profiles appear to have been deleted as of Thursday. It was not immediately clear if he has an attorney. Wagner also allegedly pushed others to hunt immigration officers and stated his goal is to unmask and identify the agents. In a social media post on January 13th, he allegedly said Minnesota is where ICE has come to die. "We want to know who they are. We will identify every single one of them, and we will prosecute them to the fullest extent of the law," he said, according to prosecutors. "If it has to be done at the barrel of a gun, then let us have a little fucking fun." Wagner is also accused of promoting violence against ICE officers, including by urging others to get your fucking guns and stop these fucking people, in a video posted to Facebook on January 24th. The Justice Department accused Wagner of publishing the personal information of an ICE supporter in Michigan and threatening the person. This man has allegedly doxed and called for the murder of law enforcement officers, encouraged bloodshed in the streets, and proudly claimed affiliation with the terrorist organization Antifa before going on the run, Attorney General Pam Bondi said in a statement. Today's arrest illustrates that you cannot run, you cannot hide, and you cannot evade our federal agents. If you come for law enforcement, the Trump administration will come for you. White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt said the Trump administration would hold accountable anyone who illegally obstructs law enforcement operations or targets, doxes, and harasses ICE agents. Protests have broken out in Minnesota in response to Operation Metro Surge, which the Trump administration launched in December to ramp up immigration enforcement efforts in the state. As part of the operation, more than 3,000 immigration agents descended on Minneapolis. The Trump administration said Wednesday that more than 4,000 people in the U.S. illegally were arrested as part of Operation Metro Surge. White House Border Czar Tom Homan also announced Wednesday that 700 law enforcement personnel will withdraw from Minnesota, though roughly 2,000 ICE officers will remain in the state. The drawdown comes as immigration agents have come under scrutiny for the tactics they've used against protesters in Minneapolis. 2 protesters, Renee Good and Alex Preddy, were shot and killed by immigration officers last month. The FBI is leading an investigation into the shooting involving Preddy. Now, needless to say, I think a good deal of the messaging in this article is deliberately misinterpreted by the authorities. I mean, obviously if you want to go after all political opponents, you're going to take this as the most malicious way possible. But the statements, we should cripple them. I think pretty clearly that's not referring to literally physically crippling ICE agents. Pretty sure any reasonable person understands that to mean that one would cripple an operation, would make whatever the operation that they have it is, Operation Metro Surge, and make that unable to be effective and really hamper the efforts of the DHS. Pretty clearly, he's not calling for kneecaps there. Or, anywhere we have our opportunity to get our hands on them, we need to put our hands on them. Or we need to hunt immigration officers and unmask and identify them. Or where Minnesota is where ICE has come to die. Pretty sure, I feel very comfortable asserting that none of that is about actual physical violence or about violence at all, except, of course, stopping ICE violence. But rather that it's maybe not even a call to action, but the gentleman's assertion that action needs to be taken to prevent ICE from being able to deport people and terrorize the Twin Cities. Anywhere, he says, we want to know who they are, we'll identify every single one of them, and we'll prosecute them to the fullest extent of the law. Obviously, his plan or his desire is for people to get out into the streets, get active, and identify ICE agents, identify the crimes that they are committing, and make sure that they actually get held accountable for their actions. Minnesota is where ICE has come to die, does not mean that he thinks that that's where ICE agents are going to be killed. It's where he wants ICE as an organization to die. Not physically, not literally die, but cease to exist as an operation, as an organization. Basically, that the Minnesota and the Twin Cities and the Metro Surge has gone so far that this is where the American public is done and just wants them gone. It is not an act, calling for an act of violence against the state or against law enforcement. Now, perhaps he was a little forceful. He says, if it has to be done at the barrel of a gun, then let us have a little fucking fun. I feel like that's might be song lyrics. I don't know. I didn't bother looking it up. but I don't know, it's too rhymey and has too much rhythm to it. I feel like it shouldn't maybe be taken literally. But also, law enforcement, everything that they do is at the barrel of a gun. That's their job. Every time you get in a car accident, who shows up? A man with a gun. So, if the law has to be enforced, if we have to prosecute them to the fullest extent of the law, and you have to do so by the force of arms, well, that's how law operates. It's how the legal system in the United States of America works. Political power grows out of the barrel of a gun. The police know that. Now, his accusation of promoting violence against ICE officers, I think a lot of it, again, is overblown. It does appear to be pretty illegal to say, get your fucking guns and stop these fucking people. Probably shouldn't say that. You probably should not say that on social media because that could be seen as a threat. So do not say that you have to get guns and that people have to be armed in order to put down ICE thugs by any means necessary. Don't say that. Don't post that on social media. Don't say that in conversation with your friends. You could get in trouble and go to jail. Even if, regardless of what you think about that statement, you cannot say or should not say that ICE agents need to be shot like dogs in the streets. You shouldn't say that. Pam Bondi will come to get your ass. Don't say, you can probably say DHS needs to be dissolved. You can probably say ICE, we need to abolish ICE, but do not say it is the duty of every American citizen to put down ICE agents by any means necessary and leave them rotting in the street. Don't say that. Or else, as Pam Bondi says, the Trump administration will come for you. If you want the Trump administration to come for you, you can post things on Facebook, on social media, on Twitter, on TikTok, or whatever, saying things like the people of Minneapolis should be using their firearms to liquidate every ICE agent in sight. You shouldn't, though, because you don't want the Trump administration to come after you. Don't say that. So, I guess there's some level of freedom of speech to be discussed here. To what extent can people say what they feel about people in power, people with the power to commit violence against them and their neighbors in their communities without any oversight, with impunity, and have been encouraged and specifically pulled from society through targeted advertising to treat law enforcement as a military operation against invaders. And I think that the violence of ICE is well documented and widespread. And there's certainly some discussion over whether or not people should be allowed to call for resistance to that. Clearly, obviously, we know the Trump administration doesn't want you to do that. And, maybe because this gentleman is actually in Minnesota and might have the means to be able to do it, is a different story. The last thing is, I think it's really funny that they're still trying to pretend that Antifa is some sort of terrorist organization. And I think it's very funny that the guy was wearing an I am Antifa shirt when he got arrested. I wonder if he knew. I wonder if the guys banged at his door and he changed his shirt real quick, or if it's just a really funny coincidence. I don't know. But yeah, just don't say this kind of stuff this guy said. If you want to, unmask and identify agents, make sure it's very clear that you mean that in a, legal sense. If you want these guys to be prosecuted by the law for doing things that are against the law. And, do not say, get your fucking guns and kill these fucking people. Solidarity Television is an independent grassroots news organization. That means we rely exclusively on viewers like you. Support us at solidaritytelevision.org. Modern NYC subway gates tested by the MTA use AI tech to track fare evaders. February 4th, 2026 via Gothamist. 3 companies are duking it out to win a $1.1 billion contract to redesign New York City's subway turnstiles, which transit officials have for decades blamed for rampant fare evasion. The firms have installed new fare gate designs, each with tall doors instead of waist-high turnstiles, at 10 subway stations over the last 2 months, where they're being tested as part of a pilot program. The program is set to expand to 20 different subway stations in the coming weeks. MTA Chair John O'Lieber said while testifying at a state budget hearing in Albany on Tuesday. At least 2 of the companies touted their designs having some form of artificial intelligence technology that tracks fare evaders. Cubic, which designed the now-retired MetroCard system and the existing subway turnstiles, also constructed most of the modern fare gates currently installed in the subway. But the company has come under fire from MTA officials and strap hangers alike for delays and bugs with the rollouts of the MTA's Omni tap-to-pay system, which it also designed. Cubic has not been a perfect partner and software developer, and we ride them all day, every day, MTA Chair John O'Lieber said during the hearing. So we think most of it has been worked out, but there's still a couple of kinks we're working through, to be honest. Anthony Lowe, Cubic's Director of Business Development, said the hiccups with the Omni rollout have been better prepared the company to take on the massive Faregate redesign contract. Cubic's new gates are currently being tested at busy stations like Atlantic Terminal, Port Authority, and Hoyt-Schermerhorn. The company reported plans to add them to the 125th Street station on the A, B, C, and D lines next week. The gates have surveillance technology that are automatically supposed to issue an alert whenever anyone evades the fare. Cubic officials say the equipment has cameras that record a 5-second clip when someone goes through without paying, which then uses artificial intelligence to write a physical description of the suspected fare beater. The information is automatically sent to the MTA, but 2 other companies, Conduent and S-Traffic, are also vying for the same contract and have installed their own modern fare gates in subway stations as part of the MTA's pilot. Conduent installed similar modern fare gates in Philadelphia's subway system last year. Like Cubic, the company touts its own form of AI technology that uses sensors to collect data on riders who evade the fare. The pilot program continues and results will be reviewed at the appropriate time, with the vendor selected to supply fare gates for the future, MTA spokesperson Eugene Resnick wrote in a statement. The MTA aims to reach a deal to install the new entry points at 150 of the subway's 472 stations. The MTA is also seeking ways to deploy AI technology in the subways. Last year, the agency said it's working with AI companies to deploy software that can detect problematic behavior among riders. I don't trust these AI cameras whatsoever. First of all, I don't care about fare evasion. If public transit is too expensive for people, maybe make it more affordable, maybe make it free, maybe give the people more economic opportunity so that way they think, yeah, it is reasonable to pay however much it costs to take the subway. I don't know, maybe make the city more livable rather than increasing police and surveillance in order to punish people who skip out on paying $2.50 or whatever the MTA charge is now for the subway. I think it's a lot higher than that. I don't know, and I can't be bothered to complain about people who skirt the fare. Again, how many millions of dollars are being spent on the NYPD? Probably billions. They're better funded than much of many other world militaries. So I don't know, cut their funding and just make the subway cheaper or free. I don't care. Also don't live in New York, so I guess it's not my call anyway. Who gives a shit? It's public transit. Make it public. But I don't trust AI surveillance tools in the slightest. I mean, anyone who watched the Super Bowl or at least saw the Super Bowl commercial know that the Ring and the Nest cameras or whatever they are just creating a permanent surveillance of your neighborhood and using AI for facial recognition for tracking people. And we find lost dogs. Sure, that's definitely what it's being used for. So if these turnstiles they're only going to be scanning 5-second clips of people who dodge the fare, I don't buy it. I don't believe that for a second. There's no way that that's all they're doing. How do they know when to start recording? Are they recording all the time but only save it if the people dodge the fare? Doubtful. These are certainly being used or will be used for mass surveillance and more just data collecting information. We know that the government is no stranger to using AI tools to track and oppress the American public, let alone the non-American public, whether they be immigrants in the United States or peoples abroad, especially in Palestine and Lebanon. So there's no reason to believe that they're not just going to track and trace everybody in New York City or everybody who uses the subway in New York City. Obviously, that's their end goal. So I have no faith in any of these AI programs to A, be very accurate, or B, not be incredibly nefarious tools of state oppression. And to sell it to me as, oh, well, we've got to stop these fare skippers, like I care, is bewildering. I don't know. It's insulting. Do they think I'm dumb? And again, I don't live in New York, so maybe this works more on New Yorkers. Maybe I can understand the annoyance of paying for the subway and then the next person behind you jumps the turnstile and, well, they get the same thing you did, except they didn't have to pay for it. But in places where I've lived with quality mass public transit, and kind of all relied on an honor system. If you didn't pay the fare and you got caught, well, sucks to suck. So most people would. But if you didn't pay the fare and didn't get caught, enough people were paying it, and the public transit was well funded anyway to be able to absorb those losses. And people are going to need to get where they need to go, and if their option is that's what they're going to do, especially in a city with congestion when you don't want more people to be using cars. So it's just a ludicrous. It's a problem, or I'm sorry, the AI scanning is an answer looking for a problem. They want to surveil people, and they want to have an excuse to be able to do it in a way that the general public is going to be more willing to accept. And this is one of those instances. I do wonder how much Zoran Mamdani has influence in this. Again, I don't know. It very easily could have been in the works long before him, and he might not be able to do anything about it. I don't know if he would anyway. But, public transit has to be public. It has to be available to the public. That's what it's for. It brings people together and makes their lives easier. And punishing people for using public transit by using AI to scan and track them is just absurd. If you were to tell people this 20 years ago, they'd assume it was some sort of dystopian sci-fi movie. If you told them this 40 years ago, they'd assume it was some sort of dystopian sci-fi novel. This is, I don't like using the term dystopian to describe modern settings. I feel like it's a little too gamey. But, this is exactly that kind of stuff. The Big Brother is always watching kind of thing. And it's getting out of hand. Like, really, our turnstile jumpers, the worst people, are turnstile jumpers really the ones we need to be keeping an eye on? Obviously, turnstile jumping is just the one place where you can, A, guarantee that the violation is going to be committed in a place where there is a recording, and that it is abundant enough to be able to create a vast database. You could put it on, I don't know, a street corner outside of an ATM. How many people are you going to get committing, robbery? 3 a year? I don't know. The turnstile jumping, you probably get 3 an hour. So, and not that I think that we should be using surveillance for more dangerous criminals. I don't think AI surveillance is going to be actually ever used in any meaningful way, certainly not to scale, to actually help people. Hasn't yet. I don't see any reason for them to start. They have no interest in helping the public. If they did, they wouldn't be capitalists. That's all it is. So, there's no reason to trust that any of this is going to be anything other than the progenitor to a grim totalitarian dictatorship. Did you know the People's Report is produced for video and audio platforms? Stay informed by subscribing to us on YouTube or anywhere you listen to podcasts. Discord to roll out age verification next month, February 9th, 2026, via TechCrunch. Discord is rolling out age verification globally starting next month, the company announced on Monday. All users will be put into a teen-appropriate experience by default. Only users verified as adults will be able to change certain settings and access age-restricted content. For most adults, age verification won't be required, as Discord's age inference model uses account information such as account tenure, device and activity data, and aggregated high-level patterns across Discord communities, the company said in an emailed statement to TechCrunch. Discord does not use private messages or any message content in this process. Some Discord users will need to be confirmed as adults in order to unblur sensitive content or turn off the setting. Only adults will be able to access age-restricted channels, servers, and app commands. Additionally, messages from people a user may not know are routed to a separate inbox by default, and only verified adults can modify this setting. People will receive warning prompts for a friend request from users they may not know, and only adults will be able to speak on stage in servers. To complete age verification, users need to either complete a facial age estimation or submit an ID to Discord's vendor partners. The platform plans to add more options in the future. Discord notes that some users may be asked to use multiple methods when additional information is needed to assign an age group. The facial age estimation requires video selfies, which Discord says never leave your device. Additionally, the company says IDs submitted to its vendor partners are deleted quickly and, in most cases, immediately after age confirmation. It's worth noting that Discord disclosed last October that around 70,000 users may have had sensitive data, such as their government ID photos, exposed after hackers breached a third-party vendor that the platform uses for age-related appeals. The breach reflected digital rights activists' concern over the use of age checks as a way to make the internet safer. Discord's global launch of age verification follows the company's decisions to establish age checks for users in the UK and Australia last year. Rolling out teen by default settings globally builds on Discord's existing safety architecture, giving teens strong protections while allowing verified adults flexibility, said Savannah Badalik, head of product policy at Discord, in a press release. We design our products with teen safety principles at the core, and will continue working with safety experts, policymakers, and Discord users to support meaningful, long-term well-being for teens on the platform. The announcement mirrors similar moves made by other online platforms, reflecting growing international efforts to strengthen child safety. Most recently, Roblox introduced mandatory facial verification for access to chats on its platform. Last July, YouTube launched its age estimation technology in the US to identify teen users in order to provide a more age-appropriate experience. Discord's age verification changes will begin in early March. More surveillance, more tracking, more etc., etc. This is coming downstream, it seems, from the UK and Australia, where we discussed not too long ago about how Australia wants to make it so that way people, I think it was only people over the age of 16 could use like social media, and in order to prove that you had to use your government ID. And that's the kind of thing that Discord is rolling out. Now, people already had been submitting their IDs for some other stuff, and we know that in October, I believe, 70,000 people got their IDs stolen or leaked in a data breach. So, we're very likely going to be seeing something like that again, but possibly for everyone who submits an ID. It's vaguely comforting to know that not everybody on Discord is going to actually have to submit their ID or facial scans, which is honestly maybe even worse, knowing that they're going to be using AI data to track and read your face and your expressions in order to determine your age. And there's also just a lot of people who look a lot younger than they are, or a lot older than they are, or do things like use Gmod to fake it, So I don't know, maybe that's better, maybe that's worse than them scanning your government ID in order to confirm that you're an adult. But, it's coming downstream from these so-called Protect the Children initiatives that really, to me, to a lot of other people, are just control and surveillance of people, especially of dissidents. If you're organizing on Discord or whatever, or if you're sharing information or just making comments on Discord that the government or the state or the corporation doesn't want you to be making, and they'll have a face and or a government ID attached to it. Not to mention, again, the opportunities for data breaches and data leaks. Now, there's some concern over the fact that the CEO is Israeli. And I looked into it. And yeah, the CEO of Discord, brand new, well, not brand new at this point, but from last summer, in 2025, the new CEO of Discord is Israeli. However, he's an Arab Christian from Nazareth, so he's a person who we would call Palestinian. And from what I've been able to find from relatively cursory investigation, no reason to believe that he was involved in the IDF or in Israeli military regime at all, except as a citizen. He moved to Lebanon and lived in Lebanon as a teenager during the Lebanese Civil War. Now, there's some concerns one could have also about the Arab Christians involved in Lebanon during the Civil War. The Phalangists and such were Christian nationalists who were ideologically opposed to Palestinians and were vehemently supportive of the IDF. But again, we don't actually know what his involvement in Lebanon was outside of the fact that he lived there. There doesn't seem to be a whole lot about his private life readily available online. It could just be that's not very interesting. And then as a Palestinian, he went to Canada. And then eventually, then really the most concerning part is that he got involved in Activision Blizzard. He was CFO, CSO for Activision Blizzard. Very involved in Call of Duty, from what I've been seeing. Call of Duty is unfortunately dog water now. Honestly, probably always was, especially politically speaking. But, now it's not even fun to play. Still put way too many hours into it, but it's not even fun to play. It just all adds in a money-making machine. So constant, buy our stuff, buy new skins, buy new cosmetics, buy this, buy that. Buy an entirely new DLC that is basically just, or buy an entirely new game that's a $70 or $80 DLC that's just the last game, but with a couple new differences in it. It's basically just a DLC expansion. That kind of thing. So, take a look at Call of Duty. And it's also, of course, very imperialistic and whatnot as a game franchise. So, that might be cause for concern too. But really, it's more the fact that there's nothing that Activision Blizzard isn't going to do in order to get money from you, right? So, this is the kind of background that this dude has. And so really, I think less concerning than the fact that he holds an Israeli passport. Because again, Palestinians were occupied. Not all of them were ethnically cleansed from Israel. And there's still, I want to say, 2 million Arab Palestinians living within the borders of what we call Israel. So, they're not all going to be evil colonial bastards. So, we don't necessarily have to be worried that just because this guy's from Israel, again, he's a Palestinian gentleman, and being Palestinian doesn't necessarily mean virtue either. It just means that's just who he is. It's ethnic and ethnic makeup and his heritage and background. Plenty of, DJ Khaled is also a Palestinian. He's not exactly a model for behavior. So, being Palestinian isn't a virtue. Being Israeli is certainly not a virtue. But it doesn't necessarily holding an Israeli passport does not necessarily mean that this guy is involved in surveillance and ID scanning for nefarious imperialistic reasons, as much as it is that he might see the writing on the wall and think, yeah, let me get ahead of this before the government mandates it. Or it could just be that, he's like, oh, this will be a good way to make more money by selling things to kids, or by selling things to adults, or by selling information to stockholders. I don't know. He's Activision Blizzard. He's a Call of Duty guy. That's the concern. It's just a way to, I don't want to say disenfranchise, but to disenfranchise youth from participating in community. We know that this was one of the concerns when Australia did it, was that it was going to isolate kids, particularly LGBTQ kids, but also kids who, might be experiencing all sorts of problems that they are seeking community for, and maybe have a legitimate reason to seek community from people who've gone through that same experience and grown up past it. Takes a village to raise a child, and villages don't exist really anymore. So, and it's just a violation of privacy for adults, and a huge liability for anybody who doesn't want their government information leaked. I'm pretty sure I said outright, don't give your ID to Discord back in October. I still stand by that. Don't give your ID to Discord. Don't give your ID to private corporations. Don't give your ID to anybody but, the person at the DMV or Social Security office or something. These private companies don't need to have your ID. Don't let them scan your face for their AI software programs. I don't know how much more clear to make it. And it's no surprise that people are overwhelmingly rejecting this as being a violation of their privacy. I'm hearing Discord Premium, or whatever it's called, Discord Nitro subscribers have been canceling in mass, like tens of thousands, which is good. If you have Discord Nitro, you should cancel it anyway. Why the hell are you paying for Discord? It's like paying for YouTube. Like, come on. Unless it's hours we earn it. No, but I'm kidding. It's a free service. Don't pay for it. So don't pay for Discord. The little emoticons or whatever you can get for paying for it aren't worth it. You're wasting your money. And of course, they're going to be leaking your information. So it's a privacy failure, and clearly Discord has no interest in maintaining your privacy or your dignity. Hey, if you're enjoying the show, consider supporting us at solidaritytelevision.org. Every week, there are more news stories than we have time to cover. Here are a few more that you need to be aware of. Layoffs in January were the highest to start a new year since 2009. February 5th, 2026, via CNBC. U.S. employers announced 108,435 layoffs for the month, up 118% from the same period a year ago and 205% from December 2025. The total marked the highest for any January since 2009. At the same time, companies announced just 5,306 new hires, also the lowest since January 2009, when its challenger Gray and Christmas began tracking such data. Also, job openings fell sharply in December to 6.5 million, their lowest since September 2020. Available jobs are down by more than 900,000 since October. El Paso airspace reopened after FAA quickly rescinds 10-day flight restrictions. February 11, 2026, via Texas Tribune. The Federal Aviation Administration reopened airspace over El Paso and part of southern New Mexico on Wednesday morning after shutting it down for a few hours overnight amid an announcement that there would be no flights for 10 days. The White House now says the unusual closure was triggered by Mexican cartel drones breaching U.S. airspace, contradicting an industry source who said it was because of an impasse with the Department of Defense over the use of unmanned military aircraft. An industry official who had been briefed on the matter by the FAA in a morning call and asked not to be identified told the Tribune that the Defense Department had been operating unmanned aircraft, or drones, against drug cartel operations from a base near El Paso's airport without sharing information with the FAA. A Southwest Airlines spokesperson said the airline resumed operations to and from the airport after the FAA lifted restrictions, and customers should confirm their flight status before flying. Hey, thanks for joining us for this week's episode of The People's Report. Don't forget to subscribe at solidaritytelevision.org. Organizing the working classes of the world in solidarity forever.